I've been a K9 handler for almost 11 years now. My partner is a 5-year-old Belgian Malinois named Luna. She's trained in tracking, narcotics detection and apprehension, and she's absolutely solid. She doesn't spook easily. I've taken her into crack houses, abandoned warehouses, woods at night during manhunts, and she's always steady. That's why what happened on this particular call stuck with me more than any other in my career. Story 1. The storage unit. We were called in to assist patrol on a welfare check that had escalated. A property manager at a self-storage facility had reported a strange smell coming from one of the units. The renter hadn't been seen in over 2 weeks, and when the manager tried to contact them, the phone number was disconnected. The manager had used a master key to open the unit just enough to peek inside, and that's when he saw what looked like someone sleeping in there. He immediately called 911. Patrol arrived first and confirmed there was definitely someone inside the unit, but they couldn't tell if the person was alive or dead. The person wasn't responding to verbal commands, and officers weren't comfortable entering without K9 support because of the confined space. That's when Luna and I got the call. We arrived at the storage facility around 3 p.m. It was one of those older facilities with outdoor units, the kind where you drive right up to your unit. The manager met us in the office and walked us over to Unit 247. He was visibly shaken. He kept saying he'd never seen anything like this in 20 years of managing the place. When we reached the unit, I could immediately smell it. That distinct odor of human decomposition mixed with something else I couldn't quite place. Something chemical. The roll-up door was closed but not locked. Patrol had lowered it back down after confirming someone was inside. I briefed with the 2 officers on scene. They told me they'd seen a person lying in the back corner of the unit, covered with what looked like blankets. They'd shouted multiple commands with no response. No movement at all. I put Luna on a short leash and prepared to enter. I gave her the search command and one of the officers helped me lift the roll-up door. The smell hit us immediately. Luna's entire body stiffened, but she didn't pull back like dogs sometimes do with decomp. She pulled forward toward the unit. I stepped inside with my flashlight. The unit was maybe 10 feet by 20 feet. It was packed with stuff. Boxes, furniture, bags. But in the back corner, exactly as the officers had described, there was a person lying on the floor covered with blankets. "Police, if you can hear me, I need you to respond," I shouted. Nothing. Luna was pulling toward the figure, but her ears were back. She was tense in a way I'd never seen before. I moved closer, stepping around boxes and bags. As I got within about 5 feet, I could see more clearly. It was a woman lying on her side facing the wall. The blankets were pulled up to her shoulders. Her hair was visible, dark and matted. "Ma'am, this is the police. I need you to show me your hands." Still nothing. I reached out with my flashlight and gently moved the blanket away from her shoulder. That's when I saw it. Her skin was gray, mottled. She'd been dead for days, maybe longer. I backed up immediately and radioed it in. We had a deceased person in the unit. I needed detectives and the medical examiner. But Luna wasn't done. She was still pulling, not toward the body but toward something else in the unit, toward a large metal cabinet against the right wall. I gave her the search command again and she went straight to it. She sat down in front of the cabinet and looked at me. That's her alert. She'd found something. I opened the cabinet doors carefully. Inside were shelves. And on those shelves were containers. Dozens of them. Plastic storage containers, all labeled with dates. I opened one of them. Inside was a plastic bag, and inside the bag was something that made my stomach turn. Human tissue. Preserved in some kind of solution. I opened another container. Same thing. Another one. Same thing. Every container in that cabinet held human remains. Carefully preserved. Meticulously labeled with dates going back years. I called it in immediately. This wasn't just a deceased person. This was a crime scene. A major one. Detectives arrived within 20 minutes. Crime scene investigators came shortly after. They spent hours documenting everything in that unit. What they found was even worse than I'd initially thought. The woman lying in the corner had been dead for approximately 2 weeks. But the remains in the cabinet belonged to at least 7 different people. All carefully preserved. All labeled. The renter of the unit was a man named Thomas Brennan. He was a former medical examiner's assistant who'd been fired 10 years earlier for irregularities in his work. He'd been living alone in a house about 30 miles away. When police went to arrest him, they found him dead in his home. Apparent suicide. He'd left a note, but I never heard what it said. The investigation revealed that he'd been stealing remains from the morgue where he worked for years before he was fired. Small samples that wouldn't be missed. Tissue samples. Organs. He'd been preserving them, collecting them like trophies. The woman in the storage unit was identified as his ex-girlfriend. She'd been reported missing 3 weeks earlier. Based on the evidence at the scene, it appeared he'd killed her in the storage unit and then gone home and killed himself shortly after. Luna and I had to go back to that facility 3 more times during the investigation. Each time, she'd pull away from Unit 247. She wanted nothing to do with it. I've been doing this job for over a decade. I've seen a lot of terrible things. But there was something about that storage unit that still haunts me. The methodical nature of it. The way he preserved those remains like they were specimens. The dates on those containers going back years and years. Just about everyone in my department has at least one case that sticks with them. That storage unit is mine. Story 2, the wellness check. When I turned 23, I joined the police force in a mid-sized town in the Midwest. The department needed new officers and I was fresh out of the academy. Because I was a rookie, they assigned me to the night shift. It ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I actually didn't mind the hours. Besides responding to calls, I spent most nights patrolling the quieter parts of town. It was a good experience. Low-key. A chance to learn the job without too much pressure. After about 6 months on the force, something happened one night that I still think about. It was around 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. Dispatch sent me to do a welfare check at an apartment complex on the east side of town. The caller was the upstairs neighbor. She reported hearing what sounded like furniture being moved around at odd hours, strange smells coming from the apartment below hers, and she hadn't seen her neighbor, a man in his 60s who lived alone, in over a week. She'd knocked on his door several times with no answer. His car was in the parking lot, so she knew he hadn't gone anywhere. I arrived at the complex around 2:45 a.m. The neighbor, an older woman in her 70s, met me in the hallway. She looked relieved to see me. She told me the sounds had been going on for 3 nights straight. Heavy dragging sounds like someone moving furniture across the floor. Always between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. The smell had started 2 days ago. A sweet, rotten smell that got worse every day. I asked her when she'd last seen her neighbor. She said it had been at least 9 or 10 days. Maybe longer. She couldn't remember exactly. I knocked on apartment 2B. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, announcing myself as police. Still no answer. I tried the door handle. Locked. I called dispatch and requested permission to do a forced entry based on the welfare concern. They approved it and sent another unit to assist. Officer Martinez arrived about 5 minutes later. Together, we forced the door open with a Halligan tool. The smell that came out of that apartment was overwhelming. I'd smelled decomp before during my training, but this was different. Worse. Martinez actually gagged and stepped back. I covered my nose and mouth with my shirt and stepped inside. Martinez followed. The living room looked normal at first glance. TV, couch, coffee table. But as I looked closer, I noticed things were off. All the furniture had been moved to the edges of the room. The couch was pushed against one wall. The coffee table was flipped upside down in the corner. The TV stand had been moved across the room. In the center of the living room floor, someone had drawn a large circle in what looked like chalk or white paint. Inside the circle were symbols. Strange markings I didn't recognize. "What the hell is this?" Martinez said quietly. I didn't answer. I was looking at the hallway that led to the bedroom. The door was closed. We moved through the apartment slowly. The kitchen was in the same state as the living room. Everything pushed to the sides. Another circle drawn on the floor. When we reached the bedroom door, I paused. The smell was strongest here. I knocked on the door. "Police. If anyone is in there, make yourself known." No response. I opened the door slowly. The bedroom was dark except for candles. Dozens of them. All burnt down to nothing. The wax had melted and pooled on every surface. And in the center of the room, in another chalk circle, was the man who lived there. He was dead. Had been for days. He was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the circle, his head tilted back, mouth open. His skin was gray and his eyes were clouded over. But what disturbed me most was what surrounded him. More symbols. Written on the walls, on the floor, on the ceiling. Hundreds of them. Covering every surface. And objects. Strange objects arranged in patterns around his body. Bones, feathers, jars filled with liquids, photographs. Martinez radioed for detectives and the medical examiner. We backed out of the apartment and waited in the hallway. The neighbor was still there, standing in her doorway. She asked if he was okay. I told her he'd passed away. I didn't tell her anything else. The investigation took weeks. The medical examiner determined he'd died of natural causes, a heart attack. But the circumstances surrounding his death raised questions no one could really answer. The symbols on the walls were eventually identified as occult markings, a mix of different belief systems and practices. The objects in the room were ritual items. It appeared he'd been conducting some kind of ritual in his bedroom when he died. The furniture had been moved to create space for the circles. The candles had burned for hours, maybe days after his death. His computer showed he'd been researching occult practices for months. He'd purchased books on ceremonial magic, demonology, summoning rituals. His browser history showed he'd been visiting forums and websites dedicated to these practices. According to his family, he'd become obsessed with the occult after his wife died 2 years earlier. He'd withdrawn from everyone, stopped answering calls, stopped showing up to family gatherings. They said he believed he could communicate with her, that he was trying to bring her back. The case was closed as a natural death. No foul play. Just a lonely man who died while performing a ritual in his bedroom. But there was one detail that bothered me, still bothers me. When we found him, his hands were positioned in a very specific way. One hand pointing up, one hand pointing down. And clutched in his right hand was a photograph of a woman. His wife, presumably. The medical examiner said rigor mortis had locked his hands in that position. But here's the thing. Rigor mortis doesn't last forever. It sets in and then it releases. By the time we found him days after death, rigor should have released. But his hands were still locked in that position. Frozen. Like something was holding them there. The medical examiner didn't have an explanation for it. Just said sometimes bodies do strange things. I drive past that apartment complex sometimes. New people live in 2B now. The landlord had the apartment professionally cleaned and repainted. All the symbols are gone. But I still think about that man. Sitting in that circle. Hands frozen in position. Surrounded by candles and symbols and objects meant to bring back someone who was gone. I wonder what he saw in those final moments. What he thought he was accomplishing. And I wonder if maybe, in some way it worked. Story 3, The Abandoned Farm. I've been a patrol officer for almost 9 years now. I've worked nights for most of that time. You see a lot on midnight shift. Domestic calls, traffic accidents, overdoses, break-ins. After a while, most calls start to blend together. But there are a few that stick with you. Calls that don't make sense. Calls that you can't explain no matter how hard you try. This happened about 2 years ago. It was early December around 1:30 a.m. I was patrolling the rural outskirts of our jurisdiction when dispatch sent me to check on a possible trespassing complaint. A farmer who lived about 5 miles outside town had called 911 saying he'd seen lights and heard voices coming from the abandoned farm property next to his. The property had been vacant for years. The farmhouse had partially collapsed and the barn was in bad shape. The farmer said he'd seen the lights moving around the property for the last 2 nights. Tonight, he'd heard what sounded like multiple people talking. He wanted police to check it out. I responded and met the farmer at the end of his driveway. He was in his late 60s, clearly concerned but trying to stay calm. He pointed across the field toward the abandoned property. I could see the silhouette of the old farmhouse maybe 200 yards away. I saw the lights about an hour ago, he said. Flashlights looked like 3 or 4 of them moving around the barn. Then I heard voices. Couldn't make out what they were saying, but definitely people talking. I asked if he'd seen any vehicles. He said no. The access road to the property was visible from his house and he hadn't seen anyone drive in. I told him I'd go check it out. He offered to come with me, but I told him to stay put. If there were people on the property, I didn't want a civilian getting involved. I drove down the access road toward the abandoned farm. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating overgrown fields and the dilapidated structures ahead. I parked about 50 yards from the farmhouse and got out. I grabbed my flashlight and approached on foot. The property was completely still. No lights. No voices. No sign of anyone. I swept my flashlight across the farmhouse. Most of the roof had caved in. Windows were broken. The front porch was sagging and looked ready to collapse. I moved toward the barn. It was in slightly better shape but still structurally unsound. The large doors were hanging open. I called out, "Police, if anyone is on this property, make yourself known." No response. Just wind moving through the empty structures. I stepped into the barn cautiously. My flashlight beam swept across the interior. Empty stalls. Rotted hay. Rusted farm equipment covered in decades of dust. And then I saw them. In the far corner of the barn. 5 figures standing in a circle. My heart jumped. I drew my weapon and aimed my flashlight directly at them. "Police, don't move. Show me your hands." They didn't move. Didn't respond. I moved closer, weapon raised, flashlight steady. As I got within 15 feet, I realized what I was looking at. Mannequins. 5 full-sized mannequins arranged in a perfect circle in the corner of the barn. I lowered my weapon slightly, confused. What the hell were mannequins doing in an abandoned barn? I approached them slowly. They were old, the kind you'd see in a department store from decades ago. But someone had dressed them, put clothes on them, positioned them specifically. Each mannequin was facing inward toward the center of the circle. And in the center of the circle was a small wooden box. I stepped into the circle and crouched down to examine the box. It was hand-carved, ornate. There was a latch on the front but no lock. I should have called for backup. Should have waited. But I didn't. I opened the box. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Polaroids. All showing the same thing. People. Real people. Standing in this exact spot. In this exact circle. Where the mannequins now stood. I shuffled through the photographs. Different groups of people. Different time periods based on the clothing and photo quality. But always the same number. Always 5 people. Always standing in this circle. The most recent photo looked like it had been taken within the last few years. 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, standing exactly where the mannequins were now positioned. I radioed for backup and requested a detective. While I waited, I looked around the barn more carefully. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. The floor beneath the circle. It was stained. Dark stains that looked like they'd been there for years. Decades maybe. And carved into the wooden floor, barely visible under the dirt and straw, were symbols. The same symbols I'd seen in that apartment with the dead man 2 years earlier. Backup arrived about 10 minutes later. 2 units and a detective. I showed them what I'd found. The detective took the box of photographs and documented the scene. The mannequins were removed and taken as evidence. The barn was processed for any other evidence. The investigation went nowhere. The photographs couldn't be traced. The people in them couldn't be identified. The mannequins were old but generic, no way to determine where they came from or who placed them there. The property owner, a bank that had foreclosed on the farm 15 years earlier, had no knowledge of anything on the property. They hadn't been out there in years. The symbols on the floor were analyzed but no conclusions could be drawn. Like the previous case, they appeared to be occult in nature. Ritual markings. The case was eventually closed as suspicious activity, origin unknown. No crimes could be proven. No victims identified. But here's what bothers me. What keeps me up at night sometimes. A week after we cleared that barn, the farmer called 911 again. He'd seen the lights again. Same location. Same time. Around 1:30 a.m. I responded again. This time with backup already on the way. When we got to the barn, it was empty. We'd cleared everything out. The mannequins were gone. The box was in evidence. The barn was just an empty, dilapidated structure. But in the corner where the circle had been, someone had placed 5 new objects. 5 candles. Arranged in the exact same pattern as the mannequins had been. All of them lit. All of them burning in the middle of an abandoned barn at 1:30 in the morning. We searched the entire property. Every structure. Every field. We brought in K9 units. We searched for hours. We never found anyone. The candles were taken as evidence. The barn was boarded up and posted with no trespassing signs. The property was checked regularly for months afterward. No further incidents were reported. The lights stopped. The voices stopped. Whatever was happening out there just stopped. I still drive past that property sometimes on patrol. The farmhouse has collapsed completely now. The barn is still standing barely. And sometimes late at night I think I see something. A flicker of light in the barn. Just for a second. Then it's gone. I never stop to check anymore. I just keep driving. Some things are better left alone.